Well, here we are again, Hugh. Hugh, in less energetic fashion than he sometimes is. Very often when we begin these conversations, Hugh, I have got something, something, something to just poke at you a little bit, and a launching off point. This is Leadership Uncertain. We are here for adventures in power and love and confusion and dignity. And boy, if leadership ain't that, I don't know what it is.
Yeah, yeah. Today, it's funny. This is the beginning of a new quarter for us. And it's so curious that with new beginnings comes the burden of hope
Mm.
and potentially, depending on how your last quarter went, the crutch of fear.
The the crutch, CRUTCH.
Yes, the
Oh,
crutch
how
of
interesting.
fear. So, one of the things I used to write about was I don't know if you're so one of my favorite subjects in school was materials of material material science and the mechanics of materials. You were kind of the subject, and within that discipline, there is a particular type, there's a particular focus called fracture mechanics. It's the
Fracture mechanics. Yeah.
Mhm. It's a study of how stuff breaks. It's a fascinating class. So for 3 months, you sit in class, you study all these equations, and then you have all these experiments where you take pieces of metal, you put them into what's called an oscillator. And it basically bends them at different amplitudes, and you apply different stresses to materials, and you watch them fail
Mm.
under under fatigue, under high stress, and you basically determine and learn about the different equations that govern different materials and how they break. Now, what's really curious is if you simply subject something to a massive load, it will take a lot potentially to break certain types of metal. Most actual pieces of metal will not simply break because you expend a lot of load. What happens instead is you can break a material under much less amplitude if you oscillate
Mm.
the load. So
Yes, I think
it
we
goes
talked
back.
about this, and I brought up the nearby bridge.
Mhm.
To me, Galloping Gertie, which undulated in the wind until it shook itself apart.
So that particular
Different.
conversation was exploring natural frequency,
Yes.
but not unrelated. So what we're going to talk about today is the fact that if you oscillate between having moments of intense adrenaline and excitement and positivity and back into depression and failure and not meeting your goals, and you
Mm.
oscillate too quickly between those two, it actually takes less time for your spirit to break.
Mm.
So you
I,
can either
I can
sustain
I can
misery
relate to that.
or you can sustain success, but jumping between the two actually creates a very similar effect on the spirit.
Mm.
And I learned a long
Ain't that
time
the
ago.
truth?
Isn't that funny? Uh, so watching a spirit break is very similar in a lot of ways to watching metal break in the lab, because this oscillation, we're we are subject to it as well. You know, we're not beyond all of these natural rules.
Yeah, right. I mean, it reminds me of the expression or the adage about not getting your hopes up.
Mm,
Right. The distance between having your hopes up and having your hopes dashed is significant. And so This this sheds light on, one of the questions I was going to ask you. The burden of hope.
Mm,
That is not something we generally think of as being burdensome, and yet I can imagine what you mean by that.
sure. And again, I appreciate these experiences because they're human ultimately, and as we lead others, we try to inspire them to follow us into the unknown. And we play a game. We play a very interesting game. We have to be certain about a future that everybody agrees is unknown, but nobody invests in anybody who accepts that wholeheartedly.
Hmm.
At the same time, if you're going to have any form of resilience, the other part of the trick, the part of the parlor trick, is not being so invested so that you have the capacity to recover when things don't work out as expected. Because you have to present as certain, and it's almost more important than being right. Almost.
Well, this is a very interesting position where I think, you say you have to present as being certain, and I go, man, I don't know if as a leader I've ever presented myself as being certain.
Bullshit.
And then I right, and then I start to think to myself, well, there are certain things that I'm not certain of,
Okay.
and like what's going to happen next month, like events. I'm rarely certain of events, or magnitude of success. Is this initiative that we're going to embark on, this marketing thing, is it going to bring the revenue that we've said is our target, or even that we need in order to stay in business? I have no idea about any of that stuff.
And
There is
and you're
other
mhm,
arguably squishier stuff that
mhm,
I'm much more certain of.
right. Well, and let's appreciate, just like you tell me that you take high offense when people refer to soft skills as squishy. They
I
are
just
they are
disagree with them.
not. They're
Yeah.
not. Uh, we also get to appreciate and come to terms with as leaders what matters. Like what really matters
Hmm.
is and for me, where I draw strength. Uh, One of the beautiful things, and this is all related. I know I sound like I'm about to go on a tangent. I promise you I'm not. There is a CrossFit type of workout called a chipper. We may have talked about it. They are designed to test your ability to just sit in because they're long, they look and feel terrible. When you mentally think about what they're supposed to be about, they are just awful. So, one of the famous chippers is a Memorial Day workout, a Memorial Day ritual tradition called Murph. It's
This
Lieutenant
you're
Michael
talking about.
Murphy. And the idea is that you run a mile, you do 100 pull ups, you do 200 push ups, you do 300 air squats, and you run another mile 4 times. And you run a mile, and then you look at the bar, and it's time to do 100 pull ups. And most people have never done 15 pull ups in a row.
Pull-ups.
So to look at this bar and say, I have to do 100 pull ups right now. And the beautiful thing about the workout is some gyms will let you mix and match. So some places absolutely require you do it in order. And then some say, you know
Mm.
what, you can mix it up. Do 10 rounds of 10, 20, 30. Still sounds terrible, but it's not nearly as terrible as 100, 200, 300, right? In any case, even if you mix and match and you say 20 rounds of 5, 10, 15, it's still 40 minutes of work of just 5 pull-ups, 10 push-ups, 15 air squats. And you're just doing that over and over and over again. And what you learn, and I've been in CrossFit now for, I don't know, 14 years or so. And so what you learn after that many years is that there is a moment in which you build an inspiration for attacking the workout. You say, this is what's going to happen, and we're going to go, and this is going to be the attitude, and this is my plan for taking on this workout. And just like they say in boxing, everybody has a plan for Mike Tyson until he punches you. Um, then the mile hits in, or you get to your third round, and you go, oh crap, I have so much left to do. And I'm just here. And part of the ritual with a hero workout in CrossFit is you do not stop until it's done. If it takes you 2 hours, it takes you 2 hours. You're doing them one at a time, then that is what it requires. And the gym is not supposed to shut down until the last person finishes. And nobody's actually technically supposed to leave until the last person finishes. But some people follow those rituals. Some people are old school. Some people are not. The world is changing. So anyway, I'm telling you all of this because the beautiful thing about the chipper is that it puts you into a space where you begin with an intention, but you collapse into the present. Because the way you get through a chipper is one rep. No, not even this rep at a time. This pull up, this push up, this air squat. It's not 5. It's not the next 10. It's this one. Because this one is the one you're breathing with. And this one's the one that's creating value in this moment.
Yeah.
And so the way I think we escape the highs and the lows and the embarrassment and the jubilation is you allow yourself to feel them because you get to have emotions and you get to celebrate with your team, but you don't get to invest because wherever you are, it's this breath. It's this customer in front of you. Who cares how much you sold last week? If you really want to hit those numbers, this customer is the most important customer you've ever talked to in your whole life.
Yeah.
Until it's the next sales call.
What's so right about, I mean, they talk about you've probably heard the adage, and I don't remember who initially said this, but comparison is the thief of joy. And it's used so often to mean, if I compare where I am at to where you are at, if I compare where I am at to the folks on social media, then my joy is robbed by that comparison. And what's interesting to me in what you are saying is that absolutely comparison is the thief of joy, and not just me compared to you. I've heard that one definition of what it means to be present is be where your feet are. Comparison of my right now to my yesterday can also be my thief of joy. And my comparison of where I am today compared to where I hope to be tomorrow also can be my thief of joy. That joy and I think joy is not the same. People often conflate joy with elation. That's not what joy is. Joy is a quieter emotion than that, I think.
Yes, keep going.
And joy can be had when you are where your feet are, which is right here, right now. That's where my feet are.
So let's bring it back. I told you I was not on a tangent. So for me,
you're on a comet. It may take a while.
If there's a trajectory,
it's gonna
but
come
it's
back.
not a tangent. It's not. We didn't go off. We're just coming back around.
Yeah.
So for me, this is where certainty lives. Certainty for me is not a hard, I know what's going to happen. Certainty is we are in this breath, and whatever comes next, like immediately next, is perfect.
Mm.
And there is a strength that comes, even if you're tired, that comes from knowing that whatever is next. And I love mathematics. There is there is a concept in three-dimensional calculus called the gradient. It is a three-dimensional derivative. If you remember what a derivative is, if you're in a car and you are uh, needing to go 30 miles, you need to go 30 miles an hour to make it in an hour, right? That is a
If you
very,
start at 30 and end at 30 miles an hour, yes.
yeah, and it's
Yeah.
linear travel, and we've, forgotten a bunch of assumptions, right? So in general, that is an average derivative, but a true derivative is infinitesimally small, meaning that it is taking stock right at this point in time, and it's governed by what's called a differential. A differential means that the space between the time and the thing that we're measuring and how it's changing is almost infinitesimally small.
It's been a long time since I took calculus,
Sure.
and I am remembering the phrase instantaneous rate of change.
Yes, that is an appropriate word. So that instantaneous is not exactly right, because instantaneous suggests that it is as now as you can get, but there's no better word for it. So without boring everybody here to tears. So instantaneous will work. And the idea is that it is as close to now as your mind can get. Now, what's neat about the gradient is how it is lived in real experience. So whenever I think about the gradient, I think about rain on the top of mountains. So for me, if you think about the accretion of water, accretion of moisture in this falling raindrop, and it hits the top of a mountain, what's neat about a mountain is that it is also governed by this concept of potential that we've explored in other talks. And potential in this case is really driven by this force that we all share called gravity. Like, we are subject to it and we experience it every day, and it's how we're staying on the planet right now. So what happens is that gravity is a gradient driven force that's pulling on this particle of water wherever it is on the mountain at any point in time. And as it's pulling it to follow whatever the terrain is available to have the water, this molecule of water, descend. And that's one of those hyperbolic, no, sorry, parabolic, uh, partial, nonlinear coupled partial differential equations. So it's incredibly dependent on initial conditions and boundary conditions. Because if the terrain is muddy, the water will be absorbed. If the terrain is saturated and has pooling effects right there where it is, the the particle will fall into a pool and circle. If it's on a rocky surface, it'll roll down and find its way to the sea. Like, all kinds of things can happen, and no two journeys of any two particles will ever be the same. And the way gravity operates on that particle for the purposes of the expansion of the universe is absolutely perfect every single time. And that is where we get certainty from. And if you can imagine for a second that you too are subject to all of the physics available to us, afforded by this universe, then it becomes almost, so this is where we're not going to assume fatality. We're not going to say that we're fatal beings. However, recognizing that you are subject to the unfolding of the universe, if you recognize that we are subject to potential energy unfolding. This is a concept that we explore in continuum mechanics. Advanced mechanical engineering suggests that. We recognize that as energy is perturbating and we are expressing however we show up in the world, the very next action is the thing that the universe is pulling out. And that's just the model. That's just the math working. That's not personal and it's not spiritual and it's not particularly interesting. It's just what happens. And if
Well,
and if there's no resistance that's provided to that and a deep appreciation that, and this is where we get into stuff from like Lothar Schaefer. Now he writes a book called Infinite Potential. He is a field point. Um, uh, he's a one of those nuclear physicist, nuclear chemist that teaches in some college in Georgia. He writes a really good book called Infinite Potential, and what he talks about is the fact that the alignment of how you choose to interpret and be inspired by information determines how you're likely to interpret it and what you're likely to do next.
say that again because it sounded circular, and I bet it's not.
So you are likely to interpret that which you are inspired by.
Still not there with you.
Okay, that's fine.
It's not fine with me. I mean, it's fine with me
That's
for the
fine.
moment,
That's fine.
and I'm
So if you are in, I'll just make it pertinent. So if you're likely to be somebody who's inspired to believe that things are actually going to be neutral and you'll wait to see what comes out next, you will likely observe and experience and be resonant with the experience that is most appropriate with whatever you're resonating with.
this sounds like another way of saying it, the world in front of you as you experience it is more a reflection of you than it is of the world in front of you.
a, a delightful and delicious way to interpret the same. Yes, I have no resistance for that way of thinking.
And I think that's right on the money. You know, I think about the story, whether true or not, of what's his name, Richard Branson,
Mm,
who you know was waiting with everybody as you do at the airport for the flight, and the flight was canceled, and so everybody experiences that as an insurmountable and terrible travesty, and is resigned to the idea, well, I guess we're not going to get to our location on time. And Richard Branson instead, this is before Richard Branson is Richard Branson. Richard
right?
Branson instead uh, charters a plane and sells seats on the plane to all of the other people whose flight was canceled, and so begins Virgin Airlines, or so the story goes, right? And they're all faced with exactly the same circumstance, and he
Hmm.
sees an opportunity to get there on time and to also make some money and begin a business.
I will share with you a personal story that also illustrates the point. Um, I remember one of the best business training experiences I ever had nothing to do with business. Have you ever heard of the caves in Waitomo in New Zealand?
Uh, I do not recall them by that name.
Okay. So you may be familiar that New Zealand on the North Island has glowworms in certain places where you can go
Okay.
under. It's called blackwater rafting. And this particular, what year is this? I guess 20 years ago or so. Went, and you start the experience by rappelling down into a cave, and then the
Sounds
adventure
good so
begins.
far.
And effectively, what you do is you get into a bunch of rivers that flow underneath the water. You get these rafts, and you lie down and you look up and you see the night sky, except what you see that are twinkling little stars are thousands, if not millions, of glowworms that have hung their little sticky uh, strings trying to catch the flies that hatch and go up and get killed.
Oh,
So
wow.
you're effectively looking at a valley of death, gorgeous, gorgeous death. And when you get to the end of the experience, you're down there for 4 or 5 hours, just hanging out and having a great grand old time. This particular trip ends with your having to climb out of the cave, but you have to climb out. This particular place, the exit is you have to climb a waterfall to get out, and it is not an easy climb. So you've been down there for several hours. You could be tired, you could be exhausted, you could be energetic. It doesn't matter because now you have to climb out. You could be short, you could be tall, you could have no legs or legs for days. You still have to climb out. And I remember the person I was with was is probably a foot shorter than I am, and she had to climb out. And what was clear was everybody that was on the trip in that moment had to climb out of this cave on this waterfall. The waterfall did not adjust itself for any one of us. There were no handicap guardrails or any kind of assistance that we could use to get out. There were no additional ropes or ladders for anybody to come out. It was a singular experience, or rather, a singular challenge and a variety of experiences. However, you chose to feel about the waterfall did not change the challenge that was in front of you. And I remember in that moment having to be very, very intentional about what my emotional state was going to be because in this moment I had a choice and it had no bearing on what came before. There was no bearing on what had happened in those previous 4 hours because guess what? I needed to marshal whatever was necessary to climb out of the hole. It did not matter how much or what the story was or who cared or who didn't care. The challenge was singular: climb out on and do whatever it takes to get out of this waterfall. And that feels like a lot of life. Like, doesn't matter how we got here, doesn't matter the story of how the trajectory took us here, doesn't matter what happened last week, doesn't
Yeah.
matter what happened 15 minutes ago. We are here. It is now. The challenge is in front of us. What are you going to do, Doc? Let's go. So, yeah, yeah, that's how certainty for me shows up. Not that I'm certain that something will or won't happen. I know, and I think I've shared this with you in the past, my number one job as the CEO of this company is to be a space where chaos fades away. So as long as we are walking and we are drawing breath, there is opportunity and there is a chance.
Hmm. Well, one of the things that comes up for me as you describe this business around certainty is something that I've learned about confidence.
Mm.
And, there was a long time, I think, when I faked confidence.
Okay.
With varying degrees of success at faking confidence, and what I've learned that's allowed me mostly to stop faking confidence is that confidence is not about knowing what's going to happen, as we've talked about already. Confidence is in knowing that whatever it is that happens next, I can handle it. Um,
Uh,
and I and I think about I think there's a quote attributed to Denzel Washington, something like the bird is not confident that the branch will not break, or the bird is not confident in the branch. The bird is confident in its wings.
I don't know. Let's split some hairs because I tell you where I have resistance. Because I don't even know if we can go so far as to tell you that I can handle it. I'll tell you that for me, confidence is knowing J. Krishnamurti had a really interesting series with a fellow named John Anderson back in the 70s, a couple years before he died. And he talks about the fact that we fritter away so much energy in thinking that we know and in analyzing and in worry. And there is so much power and intelligence in simply just looking with our full attention. I have had in the last 25 years, 30 plus businesses come and gone. I've had so many moments where everything looked like it was about to fall apart and I did not have the answers. And I didn't know if we were going to be okay. And I realize even that doesn't matter. I've become very perverse in my old age. No, it doesn't matter. Whatever. And instead, what I recognize joy and certainty come from instead is where confidence for me shows up is the ability to know that whatever happens, I can be with it. And sometimes that is enough because I don't
What,
have more.
and what do you mean by be with it?
Mm. So,
And in particular, how are you distinguishing be with it from handle it?
great question. Uh, I read this statistic. I don't know if it's true, but I'll put it out there because we're in a space of disinformation and rumors. So here we are. I read some silly statistic that said that NASA spends hundreds of millions of dollars on training its astronauts to not do one thing: panic.
Hmm.
Because in their world, everything is out to kill them. Everything. Every mistake, every error that can happen. Whereas here, we drop a pen, we elbow a thing, we press a wrong button. Their actions can wipe you out because you're surrounded by death.
Yeah, all you got to do is watch one space movie. You know that's true.
Yeah, just it's just death. Drop the cup, death. Like just death everywhere. So they teach people how not to panic. That's a huge skill that I think is very translatable. Like if they spend that much money on teaching people how not to panic, that's probably something to learn there here on Earth, where the consequence for dropping your pen isn't death, right? Um, being able to have crises unfolding in real time in front of you and not rush to action or panic in inaction and potentially simply evaluate that which is coming,
Hmm.
which may include calling in help or simply standing still until the wind passes. Tell you another quick story. My grandfather turned 99 last month. And when I was a child and I would hang out with him, he would kill wasps around the house. And the way he would do it is he would get a ladder, he would get his hat, he would take a massive can of bug spray, he would go up to the wasp nest, he would spray it with everything he had, and then he would stand there still with his head in his hat, and he would just not move. I was running for my dear life at 5 years old while he would just stand there, wasps flying around, angry as heck, looking for something to sting, and he would just not move. I have no idea if he got stung because he never flinched. I don't have that kind of I don't have that kind of constitution. I will simply admit that right now.
You do these mirths, right? You can't
But
hang with the
I
wasp.
will not spray a cat of bug spray at
Yeah.
an army of nasty, angry wasps and just
Yeah.
stand there, literally in their faces. I'll
Well,
finish the
I'll tell
story
you.
quickly.
Oh,
I'll
go
finish the
ahead.
story quickly, and then I'll come back. So, effectively, he would do nothing. He would do nothing after taking action and
Mm,
just let it unfold.
yeah.
The distinction between being here and handling something is that somebody might be expecting a solution
Mm,
where a solution's time isn't ready.
mm,
And
yeah.
sometimes just sitting and being with the challenge without worrying about it or fritting away special energy on it or wasting time on it, that just may not be the solution that moves us in the directory in the trajectory of the gradient.
Yeah. Well, as you were talking about panic, I'll tell you
Mm,
one of the things that comes up for me is, you were there. You've been there while we train a team on the concept of yes
mm,
and you've been there kind of for yes and 101, which is not agree necessarily, right?
mhm,
It's not love the other person's idea. And when we're first teaching people the concept of yes and, we tend to be saying, all right, someone has brought you an idea or a statement of fact or opinion, and your first job is to validate that opinion rather than to argue with it. That's to validate where that person is coming from. The way I experience my own panic
mm.
is that it is, and this is yes and not even 201, yes and 3 or 401,
Okay.
is reality is.
Ah! Ooh!
That's the yes,
Mm,
right? The yes part of yes and is reality is. And
yes.
panic, in my experience at any rate, is me trying to in some way claw back reality
Hmm.
or deny reality, erase reality, shift reality.
Sure.
And what a really advanced application of yes and is, reality is, and so am I. And what is my response to the reality that exists?
If one is needed.
Well, and one of the first things that any actor learns
No
is
response
that
is a
no response
response.
is a response.
Yeah.
And the way that when I was teaching actors,
Yeah.
and they would say, "Well, I'm not getting anything from my scene partner," I would say, "Okay, you think so? Ask me if I like you." So let's do it, right? Right? If you ask me if I like you.
Do you like me, Aaron? Mm.
No response can be an incredibly loud response. And so that's what I would do. Only my silence with them in the acting class would be much longer than that.
Sure. I can dig it. And it goes to a number of things. So communication is always occurring. The universe is always giving us feedback, right? And part of our job, as I see it, is and this for me, I guess, is fundamental to the search for intelligence. I realize for my whole life, I have been fascinated by the search for intelligence, my own, and where, because most of my life I've been academically or intellectually, I don't know, rigorous.
Hmm.
It's debatable if the word is ahead or behind or whatever. I'll tell you this: what it's brought, what smarts and quickness have brought, have usually been loneliness
Hmm.
and isolation. I've usually been the leader, which meant that I was not able to fraternize and have as much fun as everybody else. And I was always expected to know. always. I remember my dad tells the story that I used to belong to a panel quiz team, a little quiz bowl team for my school. And I remember people having such confidence in my knowledge that they would ask a question, they would buzz, and then look to me for the answer. And I was 10. I was 10 years old, and that was a lot of my life.
Yeah, that's a lot of responsibility.
And then I started to learn that being smart had nothing to do with being successful. So you could be smart, but if your smartness was inspired by self-serving opportunities or objectives or inspiration, or if you used your smarts to disadvantage people or repress them or dominate them without consent or abuse them in some way, then I was not going to be in service.
Mm,
That
yeah.
those were things that I would actually suffer. People would justify stealing from us. People would justify doing terrible things to us because I was too smart for my own good.
Mm, mm.
So I became very interested in true intelligence. And what that means to me is not the ability to solve crossword puzzles. It's how can you align God given intellect with absolute gradient driven appropriateness for this moment and who's in it with you. Like, how
Oh,
can you put your
yeah.
life in such service, in
Mm.
such a place of value creation that you end up bringing everybody to a better place because you have been given the opportunity to simply help and you
Well,
put your talents in service of something bigger and better.
I can't think of a better way to end this conversation than that.
Mm,
Um, I really appreciate your being here, Hugh, as we've talked about being in service of of whatever person may be watching right now.
mm,
Somebody who like you and I are adventuring in power and in love and God damn it in confusion and in dignity. Um, there's so much dignity in the conversation I think that we've been having. This sense that reality is it is there, but for the grace of God go I. Whether the God is something religious for you or just the fact that the universe will do what the universe will do.
mm.
I have a good friend, Steve Roberts, who says that the universe is, how does he put it? It's going to take me a moment.
It's fine.
Hmm. Benevolent is not quite right, I think.
Okay.
Benevolent, though, we'll put that in there. Playful and deep.
Mm,
And our job and the universe, as he understands it, is here to help us accomplish this task. Our job is to learn to love in response to whatever comes our way.
So you'll remember the quote that we worked through from Lothar Schaefer. That is an operating inspiration. So if you start your day, your essence for living from a place in which you hold as a fundamental tenet that the universe is here to help,
Yep.
then that's what you will see.
And like our good friend whose name is now escaping me again, Virgin Airlines, Richard
Branson.
Branson, you
Hmm.
will find opportunity in whatever the universe brings you. And man, that's a thing to learn,
Mm.
and it's a lifelong pursuit. And I'm grateful to have you as a companion in that pursuit.
Thank you for everything today. I wish everybody well. Stay safe
Kyle.
with this hurricane.